Paul's third missionary journey is complete. He has left Ephesus and now journeys to Jerusalem. He is repeatedly warned that going to Jerusalem will result in his arrest, and although they do not say so explicitly, they obviously fear his execution will follow. Nevertheless, like Jesus, Paul sets his face towards Jerusalem. And, sure enough, as the Holy Spirit had warned him, Paul is arrested by the Romans. From chapter 22 onwards to the end of the book, Paul is in captivity. In broad terms, Paul's story is structured like a gospel. We have a period of itinerant ministry filled with miracles and mounting opposition, resolute travel to Jerusalem where arrest is predicted, arrest and trials, and then a denouement which, in Paul's case, is much less spectacular than Jesus's. In fact, we do not know whether Acts concludes with Paul's death or not. My current view is that the end of Acts implies the end of Paul's life, though it is also claimed Paul was released and went to Spain as planned before being recaptured by Rome and then executed. When Paul arrives in Jerusalem, he goes to meet the leader of the church, James, the Lord's brother. It is intriguing that James and not Peter is now leader, which is first revealed to the reader at the Jerusalem Council in chapter 15, when James gives his ruling in verse 19, though an earlier hint of his leadership can be found at 12:17. Paul is warned that many Jews have misinterpreted his preaching to mean that it is Jews and not Gentiles who must disregard circumcision and other matters of the law. But ironically, James's advice about going to the temple to diffuse the tension over Paul's relationship to Judaism is precisely what causes it to explode. What happens next is spookily reminiscent of the dangers of social media. A small group makes a false accusation and, rallying a mob, it accelerates into mass outrage, and the hapless victim is brutally subdued without trial. Paul was indeed in the process of being murdered when he was rescued by Roman soldiers, and the temple was permitted to execute those who committed sacrilege, such as a Gentile going beyond the Gentile court. Even a Roman soldier was executed by the governor Cumanus for burning a Jewish law scroll. The Roman is twice surprised by Paul's identity. First, he is surprised by Paul's educated style of Greek, as he had assumed Paul was an Egyptian revolutionary. Paul makes a slight show of hurt pride in the way he responds by saying he is from no mean city, but when he addresses the people, he switches to Aramaic, the language of Palestine, not his first language. As in Athens, Paul understands the need to connect with his audience. Now Paul tells his story, and this is the second of 3 times in Acts where it is told. If you compare the stories closely, you will see that there are a number of striking differences, even disagreements in the details. But stories were flexible in the telling, as long as they maintained the basic points, and varying detail was good rhetorical style. A significant new detail in this telling is that Paul was at some point praying in the temple when Jesus appeared to him again. It is not surprising that Paul reveals this detail in his defense, as he is accused of blaspheming the temple. It is the moment when Jesus tells him to go far away to the Gentiles that the crowd can bear no more. The tribune was presumably baffled and frustrated at the resumption of violence, so he resorted to the normal method of interrogation, scourging. This was going to be bad. Paul had been beaten with rods before, and just now nearly beaten to death. But the Roman scourge was a whip made either of metal chains with iron balls at the end, or of leather with pieces of metal or bone woven into it. It could easily have maimed him, but perhaps now it might have killed him. Paul surprises the tribune a second time by revealing his Roman citizenship, and freeborn no less. The Roman himself had to give a large bribe, but Paul's citizenship came either from his father or possibly earlier, from the period of the civil wars when Roman generals granted citizenship to certain Greeks in the East who had supported their cause. Once again, Paul knows his audience. This revelation has saved him from a dangerous flogging, but its real significance will be revealed later on.